Daniel Caesar stopped singing. He pulled a letter from his pocket. And the first line he read made Jimmy Fallon cry. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Studio 6B at Rockefeller Center. Thursday night, October 2023. Another packed audience. Another lineup of celebrities and musical guests. Another night of laughs and games and the comforting rhythm of late-night television that millions of Americans had come to depend on. Daniel Caesar was the musical guest. The Canadian singer-songwriter known for his soulful voice and emotionally raw lyrics. He was there to promote his new album, perform a single, do a quick interview with Jimmy, and head back to his hotel. Standard late-night show appearance. In and out. Professional. Smooth. Except Daniel Caesar had brought something with him that night. Something folded in his jacket pocket. A letter he'd been carrying for 3 weeks, debating whether he had the courage to share it on national television. The interview had gone well. Jimmy and Daniel had talked about the new album, laughed about touring stories, played off each other with easy chemistry. The audience loved it. The producers were happy. Everything was running on schedule. "All right," Jimmy said, wrapping up the interview segment. "Daniel Caesar, everybody! Stick around, he's going to perform for us after the break." The show cut to commercial. Daniel walked over to the performance area, where his band was set up. He adjusted his microphone, took a sip of water, and felt the letter in his pocket. 3 weeks ago, Daniel had received a message on Instagram. From a woman named Sarah Mitchell. The message was long, personal, and it had stopped Daniel in his tracks as he read it on his tour bus somewhere between Chicago and Detroit. Sarah's 17-year-old son, Marcus, was dying of leukemia. He'd been fighting for 2 years. Chemotherapy, radiation, a failed bone marrow transplant. The doctors had given him weeks, maybe a month. Marcus loved Daniel Caesar's music. It was all he listened to in the hospital. His favorite song was "Get You." He'd play it on repeat during his treatments, letting the melody carry him through the pain and nausea and fear. Sarah's message was simple. Could Daniel possibly record a video message for Marcus? Just a few words. Something Marcus could watch during his final days. Daniel had done more than that. He'd called Marcus on FaceTime from his tour bus. They'd talked for 40 minutes. About music, about life, about what happens when you're 17 and facing the end. Marcus had cried. Daniel had cried. And at the end of the call, Marcus had asked Daniel a question. "Will you do me a favor?" "Anything, man." "What do you need?" "My mom, she's been taking care of me for 2 years. She quit her job. She sold her car to pay for treatments insurance didn't cover. She sleeps in a chair next to my hospital bed every night. She never complains. She never shows me how scared she is." Marcus's voice had cracked. "She loves your music too. She says it's the only thing that helps her sleep. Could you maybe play something for her? After I'm gone? So she knows she's not alone?" Daniel had promised he would. And then, 3 days later, Sarah had sent another message. Marcus had passed away peacefully in his sleep, holding his mother's hand, with "Get You" playing softly in the background. The funeral had been small. Just family and a few friends. Sarah had sent Daniel a photo, Marcus in his casket, looking peaceful, wearing the Daniel Caesar t-shirt he'd bought at a concert 2 years ago when he was still healthy enough to attend. And Sarah had sent a letter. Handwritten. 6 pages. About Marcus. About music. About grief. About how Daniel's phone call had given her son joy in his final days. About how she would carry that gift for the rest of her life. Daniel had carried that letter for 3 weeks, reading it over and over, wondering what he could possibly do to honor the promise he'd made to a 17-year-old boy who'd run out of time. Tonight, on The Tonight Show, with cameras rolling and millions watching, Daniel had decided. Cameras were live when Daniel Caesar stopped mid-song, pulled a letter from his pocket, and the first line he read completely destroyed Jimmy Fallon. The show came back from commercial. Jimmy introduced the performance. Ladies and gentlemen, performing his new single, Daniel Caesar. The studio lights dimmed. Daniel stood center stage, microphone in hand, his band behind him. The opening notes began, gentle, soulful, the kind of melody that makes you close your eyes and feel something. Daniel started singing. His voice filled the studio, that signature smooth tone that had made him famous. The audience swayed. The cameras glided smoothly around him. It was beautiful. Perfect. Exactly what a Tonight Show musical performance should be. And then, 30 seconds into the song, Daniel stopped. Not a pause. Not a breath. He stopped completely. The band continued for 2 more bars before they realized something was wrong and faded out, confused. The studio went silent. Daniel lowered his microphone. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter. 6 pages, worn from being read and reread, the edges soft from being carried. Jimmy sat behind his desk, smile fading, leaning forward. The producers in the control room started talking frantically into headsets. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure what was happening. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice quiet but the microphone catching every word. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I need to do something different tonight." He looked at Jimmy. "Jimmy, 3 weeks ago I got a message from a mother whose son was dying of cancer. His name was Marcus. He was 17. And he asked me to make a promise." The studio was completely still. Every camera locked on Daniel. Jimmy's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. This was real, this was happening. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. Daniel unfolded the letter. "This is from Marcus's mother, Sarah. Marcus passed away 3 days after we talked on the phone. And before he died, he asked me to do something for his mom. He said music was the only thing that helped her sleep. The only thing that made the hospital room feel less like a place where her son was dying." Daniel's voice cracked. He looked down at the letter, then back up at the audience. "Marcus asked me to play something for her. After he was gone. So she'd know she wasn't alone." Jimmy's hands had moved to cover his mouth. The Roots band members were frozen, instruments silent. Questlove had tears in his eyes. "Sarah," Daniel said, looking directly into the camera, "I know you're watching. Marcus told me you watch The Tonight Show every night. He said it makes you laugh when everything else makes you cry." He held up the letter. "You wrote me 6 pages about your son. About how he loved music. About how he stayed strong even when he was scared. About how he worried more about you than himself, even at the end." Daniel paused, composing himself. "You wrote that the last thing he said to you was, 'Mom, don't forget to listen to the music.' And I promised him I would make sure you did. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." Daniel turned to his band. "Guys, can we do Get You? The way Marcus loved it?" The band members nodded, wiping their eyes, adjusting their instruments. Jimmy stood up from his desk, protocol completely abandoned, and walked toward the performance area. He stood at the edge of the stage, hands in his pockets, tears streaming down his face, not even trying to hide them. The opening notes of Get You began. Soft. Gentle. The song Marcus had played on repeat during chemotherapy. The song that had been playing when he took his last breath. Daniel sang. Not the polished performance version. Something rawer. More vulnerable. Like he was singing directly to a grieving mother somewhere watching her television through tears. The audience wasn't swaying anymore. They were crying. Openly. 300 strangers sharing the weight of a 17-year-old boy's final wish. Halfway through the song, Daniel paused again. He looked at Jimmy, who was now openly sobbing, not caring that millions of people were watching. "Jimmy," Daniel said softly, "Marcus's mom wrote something in this letter. She said that after Marcus died, she found a note he'd left for her. And she wanted me to share it. She said maybe other people need to hear it too." Jimmy nodded, unable to speak. Daniel read from Sarah's letter, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. Marcus wrote, "Mom, I know you're going to miss me. I know you're going to be sad. But please remember that every song that ever made you smile, I'm in it now. Every melody that ever gave you peace, I'm there. Music doesn't die. Love doesn't die. I'm just in a different key now." The studio erupted. Not in applause, not yet. In that collective sound of 300 hearts breaking and healing simultaneously. Tissues appeared throughout the audience. The Roots band members were crying. The camera operators were wiping their eyes with their sleeves. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Jimmy walked fully onto the stage. He stood beside Daniel, put his hand on the singer's shoulder, and turned to address camera one. We don't usually do this," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion, struggling to find words. "This isn't how the show works. But right now, I don't care about the show. I care about Sarah Mitchell, who's watching somewhere, who lost her son 3 weeks ago." He looked at Daniel. "And I care about this incredibly brave artist who could have come here tonight, performed his single, promoted his album, and gone home. But instead, he chose to honor a promise to a 17-year-old boy." Jimmy turned back to the camera. "Sarah, if you're watching, and Marcus said you would be, I want you to know something. Your son asked Daniel to make sure you weren't alone. But tonight you need to know that you're not just not alone. You're surrounded. By everyone in this studio. By everyone watching at home. By every person who's ever lost someone they loved and found them again in a song." He paused, collecting himself. Marcus is right. Love doesn't die. It just changes key. And tonight we're all listening. The audience stood. All of them. Applauding, crying, honoring a boy they'd never met and a mother they'd never know. The band began playing again, soft and gentle, and Daniel finished, "Get You," while Jimmy stood beside him, hands still on his shoulder, bearing witness. When the final note faded, Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in his pocket. But then he paused, pulled it back out, and walked over to Jimmy. "She wrote at the end," Daniel said quietly, "that she wanted me to give this to someone who would understand. Someone who makes people smile when they're sad. Someone who reminds people that joy still exists even when grief feels permanent." He handed the letter to Jimmy. "She said you remind her of Marcus. The way you laugh. The way you find light in everything. She wanted you to have this." Jimmy took the letter with trembling hands. He looked down at Sarah's handwriting, at 6 pages of a mother's grief poured onto paper, and completely broke down. Not the cute cry he sometimes did during emotional interview moments. Full, body-shaking sobs. Daniel embraced him. 2 men who'd barely known each other 20 minutes ago, holding each other on national television, while the Roots played softly and 300 people witnessed pure, unfiltered human connection. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. The show didn't go to commercial. The producers had stopped trying to regain control. This moment was bigger than television. Jimmy composed himself enough to speak. "I have a daughter," he said, his voice barely steady. "Winnie. She's 10. And sometimes when I'm away doing this show, working late, missing bedtime, I worry that I'm missing what matters. That I'm choosing laughs over life." He looked at the letter in his hands. But reading this, Marcus didn't ask for more time. He asked for his mother to have music. To have joy. To have moments that made her forget, even for 3 minutes, that her heart was breaking. And that's what we do here. That's what Daniel does with his music. That's what everyone who makes art does. We create the moments that make grief bearable. Jimmy turned to the audience. "Sarah Mitchell, wherever you are, your son knew that. He knew that the best gift he could give you wasn't more time, because there's never enough time. It was permission to keep listening. To keep feeling. To keep finding him in every song that makes you smile." He held up the letter. "I'm going to keep this. And every night before I go on stage, I'm going to remember why I do this. Not for ratings. Not for laughs. But for every Sarah Mitchell watching who needs 3 minutes of light in the darkness. The audience erupted in applause. Standing, sustained, the kind of applause that isn't about entertainment but about witnessing something sacred. Jimmy carefully folded the letter and placed it in his jacket pocket, over his heart. "Thank you, Daniel," he whispered. "Thank you for trusting us with this." Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes. "Marcus trusted you. That's why he wanted his mom to watch tonight." The show ended differently that night. No games. No comedy bits. Just Jimmy, standing at his desk, the letter still in his pocket, speaking directly to camera. "If you're grieving tonight, find the music. If you're scared, find the melody. And if you're alone, remember, Marcus was right. Love doesn't die. It just changes key." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell attended a Daniel Caesar concert in Philadelphia. Jimmy Fallon was there too, in the audience, wearing the same jacket with Marcus's letter still in the pocket. After the show, the three of them stood backstage and cried together. Sarah brought a photo of Marcus in his Daniel Caesar t-shirt. Jimmy had it framed and it sits in his dressing room today. Every night before the show, Jimmy touches that frame and remembers why he's there.